Welcome to today's American Bar Association section of Civil Rights and Social Justice Chair Chat. The Chair Chat is designed to bring together legal scholars, advocates, thought leaders, and activists committing to fighting for social justice, protecting our democracy, and upholding the rule of law, and to share strategies for tackling the existing and emerging civil rights issues facing our country. My name is Karla McKanders, and I'm honored to be the guest host for today's session. I currently serve as the director of the Thurgood Marshall Institute, an interdisciplinary social science research institute housed within the Legal Defense Fund. Today's Chair Chat is co-hosted by the Thurgood Marshall Institute and the UC Berkeley Center for Othering and Belonging. This chat will promote a public health-centered vision for traffic safety. For this discussion, I have the great pleasure of being joined by my colleague, Dr. Sandhya Kajeepeta, and our esteemed guest, Dr. Osagie Obasogie. Dr. Kajeepeta is a senior researcher and statistician at LDF's Thurgood Marshall Institute. Her research focuses in on the public health consequences of structural racism, criminalization, violence, and housing insecurity. Dr. Obasogie is the Haas Distinguished Chair and Professor of Law at the University of California, Berkeley School of Law with a joint appointment in the Joint Medical Program and School of Public Health. His current work examines the role of science, medicine, and medical professionals in hindering the ability to hold police officers accountable when they use excessive force, and studies on how legal doctrine produces police violence. Before I turn the conversation over to our guest, I want to provide a brief introduction to the concept of safe roads for all and why we chose this critical issue to focus an ABA Chair Chat on. Traffic safety poses a major challenge in the United States. Despite advancements in vehicle technology, traffic safety continues to be problematic as it results in an increasing number of injuries and deaths. Black people are particularly vulnerable to unsafe roads, facing a higher rate of traffic-related fatalities than their white counterparts. In the United States, we've persistently relied on law enforcement to achieve traffic safety and public safety more generally through enforcement by armed officers. However, the existing research, as will be presented today, does not support the policy's decision that police traffic enforcement reduces traffic fatalities or improves road safety. And in fact, police traffic enforcement has serious adverse consequences for community health and well-being within all communities. In this conversation, we'll accompany the release of a research brief written by Dr. Kajeepeta on the same topic. So we hope that this discussion will provide a different view on how traffic safety can lead to public health consequences, and so that we could develop a more health-centered version of how to promote public safety for all Americans.
Okay. Thank you so much, Karla, and thanks for the opportunity to share our new research brief, Safe Roads for All. This brief presents a vision for traffic safety that doesn't rely on police and details how policing fails to deliver traffic safety and also fuels racial disparities in the criminal legal system and disproportionately subjects Black communities to racialized police violence. I should start by saying this is by no means the first report to name the racialized harms of police traffic enforcement. People have been describing the dangers and indignities of driving while Black for many decades, and this issue is also well documented in empirical social science research. This research brief is very much informed by that existing research and scholarship, including your work, Dr. Obasogie. What I hope this brief does is first add to that chorus of voices calling for a new approach to traffic safety that doesn't rely on police by synthesizing the existing evidence base. And second, frame this issue from a public health perspective, Because I'm an epidemiologist by training, I tend to think of all problems in this way, where the ultimate goal is improving public health and public safety. And so we design our interventions in order to meet that goal. So the brief is structured in 3 parts. First is the need for safe roads, so kind of introducing that public health framing. Second, the problems with policing of roads, which presents all of the empirical evidence of the ineffectiveness and harmfulness of police traffic enforcement, especially for Black drivers and pedestrians. And finally, we close by presenting an affirmative vision for traffic safety without police. And I'll just spend a few minutes walking through some of the highlights from each of these sections. So first is the need for safe roads. I think contrary to what many people might expect, given innovations and improvements in car safety over time, traffic safety in the US actually continues to get worse, with traffic crashes killing more than 40,000 people per year and injuring another 2 to 3 million people every year. And traffic crashes remain a leading cause of death for Americans under 55 years old. Black communities are disproportionately impacted by unsafe roads and traffic injuries due primarily to systemic underinvestment in road safety infrastructure in many majority Black neighborhoods. So a study that kind of spells out this disparity found that compared to white Americans, the fatality rate per mile traveled for Black Americans is 4.5 times higher while biking, 2.2 times higher while walking, and 1.8 times higher while traveling in a car. So clearly, traffic safety is a very critical public health problem, and it's one that is exacerbating racial health inequities. And so centering the brief around naming traffic safety as this really crucial public health problem, I think drives home the point that we're talking about removing police from traffic enforcement, not at the expense of traffic safety. There's often the question of, well, if we remove police enforcement, then what happens to traffic safety? Who or what will be keeping our roads safe? And the truth is, our current response isn't working. Road safety is getting worse, and so we need to invest in solutions that are truly effective. So that brings us to part 2, which presents the existing evidence on the problems of police traffic enforcement. The main takeaway is that evidence doesn't support the argument that police traffic enforcement improves road safety, and it has clear harmful consequences that disproportionately impact Black communities. There's a comprehensive analysis of traffic stops that was conducted across 33 states, and it found no association between the rate of police stops and the rate of traffic fatalities. Studies of pretextual stops, which have the ostensible purpose of reducing non-traffic crimes like drug and weapon offenses, also suggest that pretextual stops are not associated with reductions in crime rates, and the large majority of stops don't result in the discovery of contraband. In addition, we know that police traffic enforcement is associated with many negative externalities, especially for Black communities, including the production of racial disparities in the criminal legal system, police violence, including police killings, wealth extraction through fines and fees, PTSD, and other psychological consequences from repeated dehumanizing interactions with police. And it's also associated with decreased political participation across broader swaths of the community. So given the urgent need to reduce traffic injuries and fatalities, coupled with the evidence that police traffic enforcement has adverse racialized consequences and doesn't increase safety, then it's critical that we reimagine our approach to traffic safety. So in the last part of the brief, we present strategies for traffic safety that begin with front-end prevention, so designing safer roads on which traffic violations are less likely to occur in the first place, and then followed by back-end responses to traffic violations when they do occur that prioritize public safety and public health. So the front-end prevention strategies are focused on policy, infrastructure, and design changes to physically make roads safer. That includes things like wider sidewalks, raised crosswalks, longer yellow light lengths, and lowering speed limits. Even with these infrastructure and design changes, road safety policies still have to be enforced, and there will still be traffic violations that require a response. But this response could be one that prioritizes safety instead of relying on armed police officers. So our proposed background response strategies include eliminating the practice of pretextual stops and ultimately transferring routine traffic enforcement authority from police to a non-police civilian agency. This would also include providing vouchers to drivers for minor offenses like broken car lights, and eliminating the use of debt-based driver's license suspensions. And then finally, some jurisdictions are also beginning to implement driver accountability programs for more serious traffic violations that have the goal of actually addressing and correcting the underlying dangerous driving behavior. So I will stop there in terms of giving an overview of the brief, and I'd love to turn it over to you, Dr. Obasogie, to get your reactions and kind of have a more open discussion. Thanks.
Great. So first, I want to thank you all for inviting me to join this really important conversation. This brief that you've created is incredible and well needed. And I think it brings together so many different literatures and ways of thinking in a really comprehensive and accessible format. And my hope is that it really stimulates in a really important conversation. So again, thank you for writing this brief and inviting me to join you all to talk about it. I think your opening does a great job of talking about the brief, and I just want to talk about a couple of things that I think can help broaden our conversation. And so first, as you mentioned earlier, I think this public health sensibility that you brought to this conversation is super important. For those in the audience who may not be as familiar with public health and its contribution, so public health is distinguished by its focus on understanding the social determinants of health. So typically, like in medicine, or particularly clinical medicine, we think about health as an individual issue. It's something that individuals have, and their individual problems. So the main contribution of a public health framework is that it helps us understand how social and environmental changes can put people in a better place to be healthy, and can also help combat those issues in our environment that are making us sick. And so this is relevant to the conversation about traffic safety because it helps us understand and think about how we can move away from a policing-focused effort to make the streets safer and more towards a community-based approach that focuses on changing the structures and environment to put all people in a safer position with regards to how they travel by car. And so this is, I think, a really important conversation to the extent that it helps further what I think of as a broader kind of abolitionist sensibility. That is to say that reducing the amount of reliance that we have on policing for our safety. So an important part of the abolitionist literature is that police don't make communities safer. It's people that make people safer. That is to say that we should not necessarily rely upon law enforcement to address these kind of issues around public safety, that we can think about broader structural and community changes and efforts that can help make our communities or put our communities in a better place. And I think this brief is in that it operates in that vein to the extent that it moves us away from these type of police interactions that we've seen time and time again can end up in really deadly and harmful situations. And so by reducing the contact that communities of color have with police and focusing on broader structural and environmental changes, this can be not only an opportunity to make car traffic safer or traveling by car safer, but also reduce the amount of opportunities that police have to have those unfortunate run-ins with communities of color that we've seen to be all too harmful and deadly. Secondly, the other point that I think that is really important from this brief is this idea that, police stops are also dangerous for police officers. That is to say that these situations where police are stopping people at night in dark areas, these are situations that that can create situations that are not only harmful for drivers and pedestrians, but also harmful for the police officers themselves. And so by eliminating or reducing the opportunities for bad things to happen and moving towards these kind of broader structural transformations and getting police out of the business of engaging in traffic stops, that not only helps community members, but it makes it safer for police officers themselves. And so I think these are just two initial ways of thinking or extending the conversation of that's in the brief. And I'm looking forward to the conversation that we'll have right now.
Great, thank you so much. One way I wanted to kind of start off the conversation is I think what really excites me and intrigues me about your work is because I'm a public health person, I often come at this more like criminal legal and legal field from a public health lens. And I think it's somewhat rare for me to come across legal scholarship that also introduces a public health framework. So I'd love to hear from you about your work as a legal scholar and kind of what you draw from a public health lens and analysis in order to inform your understanding of legal doctrine and police accountability.
Yeah, sure. So a lot of my work is in a field that some call legal epidemiology. So as you mentioned at the beginning of your talk, epidemiology is trying to understand these kind of social and environmental determinants of health. And a lot of my work is looking at law as a determinant of health. That is to say that the laws that we create have a health impact that often goes unnoticed. So if we think about law as determining health, that opens up important questions about how can we create laws that can produce the best outcomes for individuals and for communities. And policing is one of those areas that I focus on. That is to say that we can think of, if you think of police violence as a public health issue, well, the laws and policies that we create that interact with police violence have a tremendous opportunity to reduce violence, which can then reduce the harm in communities. So it raises really important questions and really critical questions about how do you design laws, how do you design policies so that the end result is the least impactful on individual and community health. And so there are a lot of ways of thinking about this, right? So one of them you can think about in terms of, the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is often thought of as kind of the doctrinal kind of infrastructure for how we think about what is lawful and what is unlawful with regards to how police engages, how they engage in search and seizures, which are kind of the framework for how police engage with community members. And the way that you interpret the Fourth Amendment kind of impacts the way that police kind of go about their day-to-day business. And so a lot of my work is trying to get or to try to popularize interpretations of the Fourth Amendment that are consistent with community health. And so rather than thinking about kind of the kind of narrow issue of individual rights with regards to the Fourth Amendment, I want to kind of start a conversation about how do we deepen the conversation and think about community health. What are kind of the boundaries and laws and rules that we need to put in place that put communities in the best position so that they don't have police interactions that lead to unnecessary death and dismemberment. And so that's one way we can think about laws as a determinant. Another way is thinking about issues of accountability and thinking about what are the rules and policies that police departments themselves have in place for holding their officers accountable when things go wrong. And so that's another way to think about police departments as, quasi public health departments. That is to say that the policies that police departments choose have a direct impact on the behaviors of their officers on the ground. And those behaviors can impact the kind of the health of various communities. And so we can bring that public health sensibility into how police departments think about their rules and policies. Then we can develop a series of kind of ground rules that really prioritize community health and public safety at the same time.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think what I really like about that frame is when you said thinking about police departments as quasi public health departments. I think not that we want to task police with more things, but I think what's really critical there is we often only think of public safety as the absence of crime. And that's kind of when we think about the criminal legal system and policing, we kind of do this cost benefit analysis of we as a society are kind of willing to pay certain costs, which of course are most felt by many marginalized groups. And we think that that's okay if we're getting kind of the benefit of delivering public safety. And I think public health challenges us to think about that definition of public safety in a broader way as not just the absence of crime, but also people's ability to thrive in their community and not having people removed from their community through jails and prisons, having kind of like trust in both the neighbors that you live around and trust in public institutions. All of those things are so integral to our health. And if we think about public health and public safety from this broader lens, then I think it really shifts our calculus of whether or not the criminal legal system is delivering those things for us.
Yeah, and I think also, in addition to all that, a public health sensibility also encourages us to think about what are the broader set of resources that might be available to help us solve an issue or solve a problem. That is to say that rather than relying upon police for traffic safety, there are a whole host of resources that we can bring to bear to improve traffic safety in a way that does not necessarily include the police. And this is what I really appreciate about your brief, is that you're saying, look, there are all types of structural interventions we can make. We can think about other ways to bring oversight and to bring some type of thoughtfulness to the way we kind of construct traffic safety in America. There are all these other resources that we can draw upon and use, and not simply rely upon, individuals of the state with service weapons to enforce, speeding tickets and other type of traffic safety. It's really a blunt form of oversight and regulation that is, just not healthy for communities. And so, a public health sensibility really encourages us to kind of draw upon the multiple resources that we have in the community that can, help it improve not only safety, but also community health.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad you flagged that, because I think what I find really exciting about road safety is that it is fortunately not one of those areas where we're at a loss for effective solutions. There are so many evidence-based interventions that we know work, and many of these interventions are already common in other countries. Like, I think the US is really an outlier when it comes to other wealthy countries like Australia, Great Britain, France, where traffic deaths are generally declining. So I mentioned some of those design and policy changes, like wider sidewalks and protected bike lanes and lower speed limits. And I think a lot of these are already being piloted and introduced in many cities across the country. One really great example of what can happen when a city implements some of these basic low-cost road design changes is Hoboken, New Jersey. And this is one of the case studies that we present in the brief. So in 2018, Hoboken implemented a Vision Zero traffic safety plan that involved very simple changes. One of them is called daylighting, which just increases visibility at street corners by preventing cars from parking too close to a crosswalk. So all it involves is just placing a planter or a bollard near a crosswalk. They also adopted a leading pedestrian interval, which just gives pedestrians a few second head start to establish their presence in the crosswalk before cars can start turning. And since the city implemented these really basic interventions, it has had 0 traffic fatalities, and that's since 2018. So it's really astounding. And I think can really speak to the fact that we have the tools, we have the interventions. It's just a matter of investing in these solutions and building the political will to do that.
Right, right. No, I found the case study fascinating, and ultimately, this is a brief about investing in communities over investing in police, right? So part of what's implicit in your argument is that the tremendous amount of money and resources that we put into police oversight can be used to make structural interventions in our community to make them safer, not only safer but also better, right? So there are ways in which these investments not only affect traffic safety, but as you were saying, things like improving lighting, widening streets. Those improve, the individual experience of community members on a lot of different dimensions beyond traffic safety. So this is really an important conversation about how we use our dollars and how we use them to make investments in our community that make everyday life better above and beyond traffic safety.
Yeah, and I think one thing that would be important to touch on before we wrap this conversation is, I think, like you said, this is really about investing in communities and communities defining what road safety looks like for them. And I think in practice, this is really a story also of state preemption, which I think is important for us to flag. We've seen a lot of local jurisdictions enact some of these changes in order to limit or reduce police authority in traffic enforcement and to transfer some of that authority. So for example, Philadelphia was the first major city to enact a driving equality law that reduced the number of pretextual stops that police could make. So like discouraging or disincentivizing or deprioritizing stops that are strictly related to equipment violations, for example. And then Memphis followed suit and enacted a similar law a few years later. And then we also have the example of Berkeley, California, where the city council voted to pass an ordinance that would create the first ever in the country civilian-based traffic enforcement agency. And all of these cities have been faced with threats from the state or preemption from the state in order to move forward. So in Philly, the local police union filed a lawsuit arguing that a state level law in Pennsylvania preempted Philly from enacting this law. In Memphis, just after they enacted the law, the state passed a new state law saying that local jurisdictions cannot remove any enforcement authority related to traffic stops from police. And then in California, Berkeley has been prevented from actually implementing this new civilian traffic enforcement agency because of a state law that says no other agency aside from law enforcement can conduct traffic stops. So I think one of the biggest roadblocks that we're running into is that local jurisdictions are trying to take these steps to change how they invest in their community and in safe roads, but then they're being blocked by the state in order to enact those changes.
Right. No, that's a really important point, and it draws attention to another point, which is how, we need localities to really lead in this area, but ultimately we need state and federal governments to be behind us. And
thank you so much, Dr. Obasogie. This was a really wonderful conversation. I appreciate you reading the brief and engaging in this conversation with us.
sure. Thank you.
I think that's a perfect place to end. Thank you to our guests for engaging in such a rich discussion of the intersections between road safety, policing, and public health. I know I will take a lot away from this conversation, and hopefully our audience will do the same. If anyone who is viewing this chair chat would like to engage in further reading around this topic, please visit tmiinstituteldf.org and search for Dr. Kajeepeta's brief entitled Safe Roads for All, or visit the link in the video description. You can also read Dr. Obasogie's articles, More Than Bias, How Law Produces Police Violence, and Police Violence, Use of Force Policies and Public Health, also linked in the video description.